I'm just killing time. 1, 3, 7. This is me, killing time, and I am looking at my computer screen. This is me, killing time, and I am working on some work. Almost time to start the talk. Do, 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 do. Okay, I've killed enough time. It's very exciting. Hey everyone. Hi, welcome to Why Should I Visit for November 2022. Woo! Today we are talking about going to Tokyo and Kyoto, or Tokyo. We're going to Tokyo and Kyoto. Wow. Okay, let's take a little pause, get our pronunciation right. But you're probably wondering, wait, 2 cities? What? This is breaking the deal. The bargain is I come and you talk about 1 city, and then you sort of mash in other stuff related to that city or not. But I thought a couple things. One is I want to do a talk that's a little bit more about maybe encouraging you to not be afraid to go to Japan in general, because I think a lot of people are intimidated by travel to Japan. 2, as I started thinking about it, I didn't feel confident doing a Why Should I Visit about Tokyo, because it's such a massive place and it is sort of everything to everyone, and we'll talk about that in particular, but it sort of didn't fit within the structure of what I like to do here. And I think talking about Kyoto as a place to go, and then Tokyo as a place that actually is, I think, more accessible than people feel like it might be, sort of work nicely together. So we're going to talk about Kyoto first. We're going to talk about that in the context of like just going as a trip like any of our other talks. And then I'm going to talk about Tokyo just in a little bit higher level about just how to approach visiting Tokyo, I guess I would say. So starting out with our maps, as always, the first thing to be aware of as we talk about Tokyo and Kyoto is they're like not that close together. They're quite a ways apart on the island. Kyoto didn't show up in the Google Maps when you zoomed out this far, but it's right there near Osaka. The reason I'm talking about Kyoto and Tokyo, pretty obvious, capital, really big city, mega city, biggest city in the world. Kyoto is the other city I've been to in Japan. So I think it's also a pretty common destination for Americans coming to Japan. It's the ancient capital, but I am eager when time and travel permits to explore more of Japan, because it's a place that I think once you've been, you just kind of want to go back to and go deeper on. So yeah, this is not to detract from any of the other awesome destinations in Japan. I just don't know anything about them. This is zoomed in a little bit more, where you can see at one extreme on the left, you can see Kyoto there, and then on the right, you can see Tokyo. And then obviously there's a lot in between, including like lots of different landscape that we'll be talking about here. So what's our agenda? First, we'll do our basic why you'll love it. I'll talk about what you're going to do on a trip to Japan and on a trip to Tokyo and Kyoto. Wow, we're going to have to work on not screwing that up every time. And then we'll talk about some logistics and I'll wrap up with Q&A. So as I go through the talk today, if you have questions that come up, either questions about something I've said or things you've always wondered about travel to Japan, there should be a question and answer widget down in the sort of bottom of your Zoom window or somewhere on the screen. So write things as they come up and I'll work through them at the end. I may not have all the answers, but I'll at least do my best. And it's always fun to get those when we get to the end of the presentation today. So first off, why are you going to love traveling to Tokyo and Kyoto? Well, I think first off, like Japan in general, and really Kyoto in particular, but I think this is not unique to just Kyoto, is like beautiful in a way that is just sort of stunning and incredibly comforting. And of course, like this is rooted into a lot of Japanese aesthetics and Japanese religion and all kinds of other things, that it is just a shockingly beautiful place. And as you explore, I think you just get overwhelmed with that sense of comfort and of just everything feeling really harmonious and beautiful in a way that you can't quite believe is real. And I don't know, that's certainly for me a feeling that just hits me over and over again as I explore Japan. And that I really, when I think about visiting Japan, visiting these cities, when I look back through my photographs, sort of that's the thing that comes back to me, is just how like otherworldly beautiful the place is. It's also weird. And that's the other side of Japan. And I think like American sort of stereotypes of Japan are sort of this balance of these two things, this sort of, you know, religious Buddhism, all these things that we sort of only really partially understand around nature and all of that. And then the sort of weird Japan that we think of, like this from the Monster Cafe, which is in Tokyo, where you go and it's for kids. And you go and you have food that's colorful, and then these people come out and they're monsters or they're fighting monsters. I'm not entirely sure. I think Huxley, who was 4 at the time when we went, summed it up best when he, partway through the show, just looked up at us and said, "What is happening?" I don't know, but Japan's weird and like in a pretty delightful way. And if that's your thing, you could definitely find weird Japan. And of course, like we're going to talk about a lot of food here. I think Japanese food is amazing. I think the food you have in Japan is a much more diverse set of flavors and foods than you would find in sort of quote unquote Japanese food in America, which is sort of binned pretty squarely into like sushi and ramen. I will say though, like this is a bowl of ramen from Tokyo, and I would say that like this is probably the only bowl of ramen that I have enjoyed more than what we can get down the street at Tori here in St. Paul. And so if you know me, you know that's very high praise. So really, really great food that we're gonna be talking about as we travel through Japan. So what are you gonna do on your trip to Tokyo and Kyoto? Well, first off, I want to just like let's level set. Let's pull some of that logistical stuff forward, and let's talk about why you shouldn't be afraid of a trip to these cities, a trip to Japan. There's a few things that I've heard when I've talked to friends, because I've talked to a lot of friends who are like both really excited about the idea of traveling to Japan. They dream of a trip like this, but they're also really hesitant. And there's a few different things I've heard. The first off, and I think this is a really common belief in America, is that it's going to be really expensive. And like, maybe I need to really save up for it, or I'm not going to be able to go and actually enjoy it because it's going to be so expensive. And I'd say a couple of things. Like, first off, at this current moment, November 2022, like the yen, the Japanese currency is really fallen off a cliff compared to where it's historically been. And so everything's kind of cheaper than usual right now. But I would say my experience, because I certainly went with that same expectation. My first trip to Japan, I went in thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be so like overwhelmingly expensive. And I just haven't found that to be true. I think what I found is that it is like broadly comparable to traveling to, you know, much of Western Europe, or even traveling to a sort of fancier city within the United States. You know, if you travel to San Francisco for a long weekend and you stay at a like relatively nice hotel and you eat at some relatively nice restaurants, Yeah, it's going to be expensive, but it's not going to be like orders of magnitude beyond what you would pay for similar things in your hometown, whether you live in, Minneapolis or Appleton. So it's more expensive than traveling to Vietnam. Yeah, definitely. But I really encourage folks to not let that sort of be a thing that keeps you from exploring a trip. Certainly flying there can be spendy. We can talk about, there's some options. It doesn't have to be. But you can stay in a hotel, or you can stay at a very comfortable, if small, hotel for not more than $100 and some a night, which is pretty normal for any big city. Food is really not that expensive. Transit, very affordable, and many of the things you're going to be doing in terms of exploring, in terms of different sites you're going to visit, are going to be essentially free. So don't let the price be a thing that keeps you from thinking about a trip. I think people also, especially when they think about Tokyo, just find it completely overwhelming. And if you sort of go to Google Maps and type in Tokyo and you just start looking at it, it's like really tough to even wrap your head around, 30 million people in this huge swath of land. It can feel really intimidating. But we'll talk about in just a moment here. Actually, I think it's a pretty easy place to navigate. And then finally, we have this sense that everyone and everything is very formal, that there's sort of a lot of expectations of how you interact, and of sort of formality in how you just go about your daily life in Japan. And if I don't know those things, and if I don't speak Japanese, I'm going to just spend my whole time feeling really uncomfortable. I'm not going to be able to sort of just navigate day to day. People are intimidated. I think, similar to the way that some people are intimidated about traveling to France, and that they think that they're just going to have a miserable time because everyone's going to hate them. That's even less true in Japan than it is in France. And some of the French are going to hate you. But in Japan, what I found is that, like, if you're observant and you're paying attention and you're putting a little thought into it, very, very navigable place, even if you don't speak Japanese. And we've got all kinds of tools to help us work through that language barrier. So really, I would encourage folks, like, if you're comfortable traveling outside the US at all, if you're comfortable traveling to somewhere where you don't speak the language at all, whether that's, going to Montreal or going to, Spain or whatever, you should feel comfortable traveling to Japan. So what about navigating within? So we're going to be landing in Tokyo, but we're almost certainly going to be landing in Tokyo, I should say. But we need to then get to Kyoto, because I'm going to recommend that you actually start out your trip in Kyoto. I think it's a much better place to get over your jet lag, get your feet, get oriented to just existing within Japan, and then go back to Tokyo once you're rested up and ready to sort of be in a much busier city. And luckily, and this sort of gets to this idea of worrying about getting lost. Moving around Japan is, I think, really easy. I think it's probably one of the easiest countries to navigate, moving between cities. And once you're within a city, one of the easiest places where you can move around within a city. Google Maps, on your phone, or if you're planning in advance on your computer, is outstanding. Like, I'm not sure there's any place in the world where Google Maps is actually more effective for helping you figure out how to get from A to B using things like public transit or ride-sharing services. So this is an example of just saying, hey, I'm in Haneda Airport, which is probably the airport you're going to land in nowadays, and I need to get to Kyoto. How do I do that? And what Google Maps is going to do for this kind of trip, you'll see it's going to tell you how to get from the airport terminal station to Shinagawa station. And if you were to scroll through here, it would tell you then you're going to pick up this other train, this fast train that'll get you from Shinagawa station to Kyoto. And then it'll tell you, get on the subway in Kyoto to get to your hotel, that kind of thing. So pretty standard stuff, but it does some other things that are really, really helpful. So first off, it almost always actually knows in advance which platform you're going to be departing from, and it helps you identify which stop you're going towards. It almost always includes the price, which is really helpful when you're using one of those automated ticket machines, because you sort of generally know then, oh, I did it right. This is roughly the amount I'm expecting, or gosh, something's not right here. Maybe I need to check. Maybe I missed a step or something. And so it makes it really easy to navigate. And even if you're, sort of entering the station in a rush, you can look at your phone and really know which direction you need to go, which train you're catching. You can grab your ticket, get the ticket for the right amount, and be on your way. And it does the exact same thing within a city. If you're trying to get from one district in Tokyo to the other, it's going to tell you how to use the subway to do that. It's going to tell you, which platform to go to, which train to get on. It'll tell you how many stops, when the train is coming, all of that stuff. So I found that it's probably the place where this all just kind of works together in the way that we wish it did in every city. And we won't get into the nerdy infrastructure bits that make it possible in Japan, but they've done all the right stuff to make it possible to have this integrated transit system in a way that just makes it really easy as a tourist. So a few things to know about transit in Japan, besides just like use Google Map and trust it. First off, there are competing rail companies, which can be a little confusing if you don't know that. If you're sort of used to a place like the US where it's like, all the trains are Amtrak, or within a city, the subway, of course, it's just Metro Transit or SEPTA or whatever. You will actually have competing rail companies, and actually even competing sort of subways or competing in rail lines within a city, and that can be a little confusing. And that's especially true if you end up buying a transit pass, like a 30-day transit pass, because that's only going to be good for whatever rail company you buy it for. And this is an area where, again, I went sort of looking through the how to visit Japan guides online, and I found that they tended to maybe overemphasize some of the transit stuff, and they get really deep into all the different types of transit passes you can get and all that kind of thing. I would really encourage you not to overthink it. The only reason you need to worry about any of that if you're worried about like having the absolute cheapest visit to Japan. And we're talking about differences of saving maybe a few dollars, of getting like a bulk pass instead of just buying a single ride pass. And what it means, if you try and go that route, it means you have to plan everything out in advance. You need to know, like, okay, on Tuesday, I'm going to take the JR line from Haneda to Shinagawa, but then I'm going to be on the, this line for whatever. And you have to figure all of that out and know how many rides you're going to do and all that. Like, just bake it into the cost of your trip that you're not going to be doing the absolute cheapest use of transit. You're just going to get single ride passes as you go. It's really easy. You look at your Google Maps, it says it's going to cost you 1,000 yen. You go to the machine, you punch in your destination, it says 1,000 yen, you're good. You get on the train, you go. The other thing is just, basic etiquette goes a long ways. And that's an area where, again, being observant, just looking at what other people are doing and really trying to process that, really trying to notice how people are behaving and try and mirror that. I think that goes a long ways in Japan. The basic stuff on trains are that trains are places to be quiet, whether you're on the subway in Tokyo or whether you're on the bullet train going between cities. They're not places to be having, loud conversations or watching, YouTube channels or whatever. They're quiet. You're going to be talking in quiet voices. You're generally not going to be eating especially on a subway within a city. On the long distance trains, it's a little bit different. And you want to do things like wait your turn to get on the train. It's, not like New York. You're going to form a line. You're going to wait for the train to stop. You're going to let everyone off the train, and then the line is going to move onto the train. Things like that, where if you just take a moment to pause and watch what other people are doing and try and sort of follow the flow, you're going to feel much more comfortable. No one's going to yell at you if you do it the wrong way. You're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to get kicked out of the country, but you're going to feel more comfortable because you're going to feel like you're fitting in. And that's sort of what Japan's all about. So, okay. Couple of those logistical things out of the way. We know we can take the train from where we land in Tokyo. We can take the train to Kyoto. Don't try and fly. If you try and fly, you're going to end up in Osaka, and then you're going to have to tackle all this stuff from Osaka to Kyoto, and it's even more complicated. Land in Tokyo, take the train. Okay. So what are we going to do in Kyoto? Well, the important things to know about Kyoto are that it is sort of the ancient capital of Japan. It's a city of about 1.5 million people. So it is not this sort of overwhelming mega city. It is a like mid-sized, modern city that has all of this amazing historical stuff as well. I think that it is an extremely walkable, very sort of chill place. But it also has sort of it's got a modern subway, it's got a modern business core. So you have access to all the things that you want to be able to move around easily. And if you need to buy anything or whatever, that's all accessible. But you can also have a visit that really is like fully engaged in this Japanese history. And here's a quick look at the general map of Kyoto. The box down here, this is sort of one of the main business district areas. This is, I think, the place that tourists are generally staying, this sort of region in the city. But the place we're going to focus on is over here in this box here. This is along what's called the Philosopher's Path, which is a term for sort of a path that just links a whole bunch of different temples along this side of Kyoto, which butt up against a set of mountains. And so Kyoto is in a very mountainous area. There's sort of mountains on both sides, on the east and west sides of the city. And so this area, when we think of Kyoto, you're very often thinking of things along the Philosopher's Path. And you can easily make this walk from where you're staying over to this area, very walkable city, or there's easy ways to get there on transit as well. And what you'll essentially be doing is you'll be exploring a whole bunch of different types of temples and shrines. Often you're going to pay some sort of very modest entry fee to get in. But once you're in, they're really just generally spaces for you to go and explore. If you're doing a trip like this and you're really, not trying to crunch out the miles, but instead you're looking to relax and have a quiet, peaceful time, these are places to go and bring a book or bring your drawing materials or whatever it is that lets you relax and really just enjoy being in a quiet, beautiful space surrounded by trees and nature and animals. And like, I think that's something I really enjoy doing when I travel to these types of sites. My slides aren't advancing. There we go. This is an example of sort of the path that you can walk on to move between them. You'll see it's a sort of just a walking path with a body of water alongside, some bike lanes and bike trails off to the other side. And you just sort of weave your way along, and you can stop into different temples, different sites, different tea houses and things along the way as you do this. And this is the kind of thing, like, you could, if you're really a completionist and you want to go and like knock off all the sites on the Philosopher's Path, you can do that. You can spend a day doing it. I think it's also the kind of thing that you can go without much of a plan and just go see how you're feeling and see what looks sort of inviting to you in the moment, and stop in and spend time. And anytime you want to get a substantial meal, or you want to just take a break from temple life, you can get back into the city within a 5-10 minute walk. It's really very accessible. If instead what you want is to go sort of even more out of the city, from most of these sites, many of these sites, you can actually pick up trails that continue you up into the mountains. And this is another area, you've heard me say it before, I'll say it again, where All Trails is fantastic, because sometimes it can be a little tricky to understand, which trails are actually going to take you somewhere interesting, which are going to be loops, which are going to be out and back, that kind of thing. And All Trails, as with everywhere in the world, is really fantastic in Kyoto. And so you can find, hey, I'm at this temple, pull out your All Trails and say, oh, there's some trails that go from this temple up into the mountains and do like a cool loop, or even might take you up to a shrine or another site even further into the hills that you can pick up and follow. So this is a really pretty typical example of the types of terrain you'd be walking in, and you'll come across, little streams and waterfalls and all the things that you would sort of imagine if you've watched any Japanese movies or anything like that gives you a sense of what this landscape is all about. And again, these are just some more pictures of just how beautiful it is. In the picture on the right, you can see that, you are still really close to this city. You can see from the hills into the temple and then into the city beyond, and then from there into, more mountains. It's a really just, beautiful place. I don't know how many more times I'm going to say that. But it feels like it must be invented by sort of Disney animators, but it's actually real, and it's not invented. It is sort of the actual historical structures and the historical sites. The city itself, as I said, very walkable. There is, certainly if what you really want to do is find like cars and skyscrapers and poured concrete, that exists in Kyoto. But much of Kyoto is much more like this, sort of quiet back lanes, areas that you can stroll through, very peaceful. Even when there are actual streets with cars on, there's always, a place for you to be walking safely and very little traffic. And you can enjoy just popping into, small shops and bookstores and coffee and tea shops and other things, and just explore the city. It's really quite peaceful. And then again, if you want to, this is then another set of hikes that are more off to the west of the city, but again, very accessible from the subway. You can just sort of take the subway line out in the mountains essentially, and very quickly, I mean, this is within a few minutes of the city center, you can be in landscape like this, where you can go and hike and explore and have these beautiful vistas. And so the other site that you may be familiar with, if you've thought about Kyoto at all or done anything reading about Kyoto, and I think probably one of the other places that tourists feel is somewhat of a must visit, is the Fushimi Inari shrine. And these sort of these red gates, which are called torii, are I think a very typical image of Kyoto. Essentially, the way it works is that you donate one of these gates, and if you do that, your wish will come true. And so there are thousands of them. I think the site started being used for this purpose in like 710, something like that, and has been in sort of continual use in different forms ever since then. So it goes way, way back. The really cool thing about this site is that it's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so you can go and do this hike, which takes a couple hours, sort of hiking up a mountain, going through these gates. There are different places to stop along the way to rest or to even use a bathroom. And you just sort of hike up and up and up. And if you do it late at night, because you're jet lagged, you're probably not going to see a lot of other people, and you get to the top, and there's sort of different types of shrines up there and beautiful views as well. When we did this hike, we also met a surprise friend, which was a wild boar that came running across the path right in front of us. And then like a few steps further on, we helpfully came across a sign that said, "Warning, wild boar." So the boar knew and obviously wanted to get out ahead of the warning. But yeah, just a really cool thing. And again, one of those things that like there's as far as I can remember, no admission or anything like that. It's just a place you go and you walk up and you can enjoy this sort of quiet experience and be rewarded with a beautiful view at the end. So yeah. Just to flip back to the map briefly, I think you can, I would say that I don't have a deep grounding in sort of Japanese religious tradition, and I am not going to pretend to tell you about why the different shrines and temples are, this one is particularly important for this reason, and this one's important for that reason. Honestly, I don't have the historical grounding to be able to unpack all of those things. What I can say is that what we did in our time in Kyoto was looking at a map like this, looking at the nice icons that indicate these are sites of interest, and then just going to them and seeing what was there. Because as I've sort of repeated over and over again, it's really easy to move around within the city. And so if you get somewhere and find out that like it's closed that day and maybe you should have done some research, a couple minutes on the train gets you to somewhere else. So very easy to just bounce around and explore in that way. And we were rewarded with discovering a lot of things that I think if we just looked through a guidebook and tried to tick off the 3-star places before we moved on to the 2-star places and whatever, we never would have ended up at them. So I do think it's a city that really rewards a little bit of unstructured exploration or lightly structured exploration. Now, I haven't talked about food yet. I'm going to save food for its own section at the end here. But I will say that Kyoto is a place that you can go and have some really amazing meals. And it's certainly a place that I think about when I think about food quite a bit. So that's my brief sort of overview of Kyoto. I would say it's a place you can go, you can, get a comfortable hotel for not a crazy amount of money. And then you can just spend a few days wandering around, doing some hiking, whether that's sort of urban hiking, just moving between sites, or doing more serious hiking up into the mountains. And of course, if you're much more serious about doing multi-day hikes, there's all kinds of options for multi-day hiking that would depart from Kyoto, and even as extensive as hiking from Kyoto to Tokyo, for example. So if that's the sort of thing you're looking for, Japan has an amazing set of sort of intercity hiking trails. But even if you're just someone who's more interested in doing somewhat more aggressive hikes, there's a lot of that within the mountains surrounding Kyoto. So I think it's a great place. It's a great first city to visit in Japan, I think, very accessible, and with enough of an eye towards tourism that, you know, the core things you want to do are going to be very accessible to you as an American coming as a tourist. So Tokyo. I think when we think of Tokyo, probably a lot of us have visions of something like this, just, you know, neon, skyscrapers, lots and lots of people, maybe pretty overwhelming place. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you're really excited about that idea of just, you know, ultra intensity and you know, people and colors and lights and sounds and all of that. What I would say is, if that's not your thing, there's like a very beautiful side to Tokyo as well. It doesn't have, for reasons that, you know, are probably pretty obvious, it doesn't have the same historical structures and the same density of history that Kyoto does. But it does have some of that. And it also has just a lot of really gorgeous public spaces, public parks. Again, those places where you can go and just bring a book and enjoy the sunset without being surrounded by, you know, thousands of people. So don't feel like it's going to be this sort of place that is all just intensity and heat and extremism. It is really a place that you can spend a lot of time in places of quiet and solitude. But really, I think Tokyo is whatever you want it to be. If you're sort of a Japanophile and you really want to go and do all of the, you know, do the different anime studios, or you want to go deep on sort of, you know, Japanese comics or anything else, like super accessible, very available. There's, you know, tours that'll guide you through the city with that in mind. If what you're really into is futurism, if you really want to go and sort of see a city that is sort of built both in terms of its infrastructure and in terms of how people use technology and how things are connected in a way that, like, quite honestly, nowhere else is you know, quite there. You can do that. You can have this sort of futurism view of Tokyo. There's history to be woven throughout it as well. Obviously, you've got amazing food. If you're into the car scene, like Japanese car scene, especially in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, was sort of the hotbed of car culture of the world. And a lot of that is still around. And there's some really cool car related sites. And of course, this is a mega city. This is a city of 37.5 million people in the broader metro area, which for reference is like very much larger than basically anywhere else. And so, of course, it has amazing arts. It has both, you know, if I don't know why you would necessarily fly to Tokyo to see European art, but like you can go do that. But it's also got an amazing art scene. And if you want to go and get engaged in the local art scene and go to galleries and hang out with young people who are doing cool stuff, like all of that is accessible. So that's why I didn't feel comfortable necessarily saying like, here's what you should do on a trip to Tokyo. Instead, what I would say is like, what is it that you want Tokyo to be, and figure out what that trip looks like, because everything is there for you and everything's accessible. A few things as you're thinking about Tokyo. Tokyo is made up in all of these different neighborhoods or districts. Again, when you just look at a map like this, it can be super, super overwhelming to try and understand, like, where should I focus on? As you start to figure out what you want your focus of Tokyo to be, you're probably going to end up sort of filtering into one of these districts. If you do a little bit of research in advance, you're going to understand, like, hey, what I'm into is X. I should probably be sort of spending my time mostly in Y. So I picked out a few here. Shibuya, which is this purpley color here, And we're really talking about this section here, Shibuya. That is where Shibuya Crossing is. You might be familiar with that. That's the place, if you've ever seen video of Japan, or of Tokyo, it's the place where thousands of people are crossing at an intersection. And it is this place of intensity and business and neon and all of that. If that's the sort of Japan you want, if you want to go get your Instagram photos, like Shibuya is the place to go. Harajuku is the sort of Japanese fashion and youth culture center. So again, where you're going to find a lot of art galleries, and that's sort of up here, right, all within this area. You're going to go and find gallery shows, street art, cool cafes, people doing different types of maker activities, that sort of thing. Akihabara, which I don't know is actually, I thought it was on this map and I'm not seeing it, and probably someone is staring right at it and I'm just not seeing it right now. Oh, there it is, Akihabara. Akihabara is, if you grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s and you were very online, you know about Akihabara because that is the place where the electronics district is. And so if you want to go and see all of those gadgets that never make it outside of Japan, or if you want to go and just explore sort of what it would be like if the Mall of America was literally just stores selling like CPUs and electronics components, like these massive malls that are just focused on electronics. Like Akihabara is a place of pilgrimage for a certain subset of us who remember what dial-up modem sounded like. Roppongi is an area that's just full of nightlife and amazing restaurants, street food, and Shinjuku, which is right here. That's another one that where I often stay just because it's very convenient, but also where you can find things like the robot fighting ring and things like that. So, doing a little bit of research in advance, you'll get a sense of where you might want to base yourself out of. But again, this is a city that is just packed full of really easy to use transit. And so moving across the city is very, very doable no matter where you stay. Here's an example of, this is a photo from Akihabara. And I just, as I say, I'm of a generation that we would hear about things happening in this really faraway place that just sounded, like a sort of mythical land where you could go and find bins full of the latest Intel processors and things like that. So for me, the first time I got to Akihabara, it was a pretty cool experience. You can still find, of course, lots of very, very cool historical structures or sort of modern temple structures within Tokyo as well. And these are often part of larger sort of park environments. And so places that you can go, and if you need to step out of sort of the busyness of the city, these are sort of all throughout the city. You can find these areas to go and just relax and find quiet and solitude. I would also recommend, if you're at all of the animal inclination, Tokyo is probably the place you would go if what you're interested in is like having an owl stand on your head while you drink coffee, or going and petting rabbits again while you drink coffee, because Tokyo is the sort of, I think, the place that has embraced the idea of the animal cafe more than anywhere else, and does it in a way that does not feel problematic in the way they do in other cases. And we can get into the specifics of why how these owls have ended up there, how the rabbits have ended up there. But if you can think of an animal, there's probably a cafe where you can go and hang out with that animal, whether it's dogs or goats or snakes or really pretty much anything. And doing something like that can be a fun way to just find yourself in a different neighborhood in the city. It can be a fun destination to go to. And if you like being uncomfortable around animals like I do, I guess, apparently, all of my photos of me with the owls, I have an expression like this. This is not me picking a particularly bad one. I just was very uncomfortable. The last district I'm going to call out explicitly as a place that is really pretty unique in Tokyo is this area called Golden Gai, and that's Gai. And it's a neighborhood of tiny, tiny little storefronts like this one here. This is actually two places. This is a main floor place on the left, and on the right, this is a series of stairs that goes up to an upper story place. But each of these is maybe, I don't know, a couple hundred square feet. And this is a neighborhood that's just full of hundreds, I think, probably definitely dozens, maybe hundreds of very small structures like this. They are bars and they are restaurants. And you go in, and this is a place where you're going to be shoulder to shoulder with, Japanese locals. And one of the great things about going to a place like this in Japan is, even if you don't speak the language, often you buy the ramen by essentially going to a little machine where you click on a picture of what you want, and it prints out a little ticket, and then you hand the ticket to the chef. He makes your bowl of ramen and hands you the soup. And so you don't even need to know any language. But I have this picture in here because this is the best bowl of ramen I think I've ever had. And this is in a restaurant with maybe 6 seats on the second floor of one of these tiny, tiny structures in the Golden Kai district. So that is the other place I would definitely highlight for you. Which brings me on to food, which is a personal passion of mine. And I think what I love about eating in Japan are that you get so many of these meals where you're pulling together lots of different flavors. It's sort of a type of Japanese food that we rarely get in the US, certainly in the Midwest, at least. It's tough to find this style of Japanese food. As I say, we mostly get either sushi or ramen. This is a breakfast from an all vegetarian sort of buffet place where you just pick out some beautiful little mixes of vegetables and pickled things and soups, and you just put your little plate together. This is an example of a breakfast that we had in Kyoto, where again, it's just beautifully presented, really diverse sets of flavors. You've got, one really, nicely charred piece of fish. You've got some pickled things. You've got some egg omelet. You've got, a little bit of uni. And it is just such a pleasure to just look at and to eat and to understand the contrast between the different flavors. And this is just, this meal in particular is one that I wish I could go back and eat this meal again every single day. And this is from a sort of tea in one of the parks in Kyoto. And again, it's a case where we sat down and they just brought out a series of these small, beautifully prepared dishes that just are a mix of different textures and flavors that are, I think, just really unique and not something that certainly you find in Minnesota, but I think really anywhere else in the world. This presentation and combination of flavors, and I'm just getting really excited just looking at it. And certainly Tokyo in particular has an amazing and really thriving sort of street food culture and sort of street food / outdoor dining, where you've got all over the city areas that are, you can see here, this is a railway bridge, where under the railway, what used to be sort of, you can imagine these were sort of arches and there was maybe streets passing under them. They've been sort of blocked in and turned into restaurants. And so you're literally dining under the railway line because this is land that couldn't be used for other stuff. And so it's turned into these sort of affordable restaurants where you go, you can go late at night and get amazing food, and you see that it's just packed and full of life. And it's I think a really interesting slice of Japanese culture to be able to go and just, sit down at a long shared table with, Japanese folks and grab some food and just enjoy a beautiful evening in Tokyo with the train passing overhead. That's the sort of thing that I'm really into. And so, as I say, Tokyo is what you make of it. The food is also what you make of it. And so if what you want is to go and eat at a Michelin-starred place every single night, you can absolutely do that. And you will have some of the best food of your life. But if you're maybe on a little bit more of a budget and you want to do maybe one really fancy meal, but you actually want to, eat just normal food the rest of the time, you're going to have tons and tons of options. and you can find it throughout the city. You can seek out food tours. You can look for web guides to food neighborhoods, but you're not going to have a problem eating really well on your trip to Japan. So a few bits of logistics. First off, it's important to know that there are 2 airports in Tokyo. It used to be that most flights from the US would take you to Narita, which is airport code NRT. But increasingly, flights in the US from the major carriers go to Haneda, which is HND. But occasionally, and this has caught out more than a few people, you will sometimes arrive at one but depart from the other. And so it's really important that you just keep an eye on that because they are not close to each other. And if you arrive at one of them and realize your flight is leaving from the other, you are going to be very stressed out as you try and scramble your way across Tokyo. Trains and subways are your friend. Certainly you're not going to even think about renting a car. And I would encourage you just, really get comfortable using Google Maps and trusting that it is going to tell you the right thing to do. And you'll pretty quickly feel confident jaunting across the cities and between cities within Japan. Very, very accessible. If you do find that you need to get somewhere that isn't easily accessible via mass transit, or you have some other mobility needs, or you're just traveling with a lot of bags, there's an app called Japan Taxi, which is probably the one I would recommend, but Uber does work as well. It just tends to be a smaller number of cars that are available, and it tends to be quite a bit more expensive. It's more of the traditional Uber sort of black car service in Japan versus the sort of UberX approach. So I would definitely recommend using Japan Taxi. Either of them are sort of going to solve the core problem you're going to have, which is that you're going to be able to put in your destination using a map on your device instead of trying to communicate that to a taxi driver who might not speak English. As I say, English is not especially common, but it's going to be manageable. A lot of young folks in Japan are going to speak at least some English, sometimes pretty good English. But even if they don't, people are going to be very polite, and they're going to try their best, and they're going to want to help you generally. And so if you can use Google Translate if you have to, just to show them, type in and then translate and show them the text, or use your best sort of hand signs and other things, I think it is a place where folks are going to really try hard to be accommodating. And so don't feel intimidated by your lack of Japanese. Certainly, anywhere you go, learning how to say hello and thank you and a few other things is always great. Payments are going to be mostly digital. You can get out a little bit of cash, but you're mostly just going to be tapping or swiping your credit card. So nothing you need to worry about there. And again, I think the biggest thing is when you're traveling, you're just going to want to pay a little bit more attention to how people are interacting and how they're behaving than you might in other places, and take that moment to process why are they doing that. A really good example is that you would almost never see someone in Japan walking while eating. Even if you get a snack from a convenience store, you would get your Snickers bar, you would go and either stand in the store and eat it there, or you would stand right out front and eat it there and then put the trash in the trash receptacle. You wouldn't go out and walk around with it. And if you're just paying a little bit of attention as you enter the convenience store and you notice like, hey, everyone seems to be just standing around here eating their bag of chips or eating their candy bar, you can pretty quickly pick up on what those things are. You don't need to get the Japanese culture guide and try and study it. Just be observant, pay attention, and you'll, again, it's not about getting in trouble. It's about just feeling comfortable. And if you pay attention a bit, you're very quickly going to feel comfortable. And I think it's an amazing place to visit, and I would recommend everyone do it. So with that, I will say that is the end of this presentation. Next month, we're going to go to Seville for our last presentation of the year, maybe the last one in general. Haven't decided about that. But we were just in Seville last week, and well, it's fresh. I thought it would be fun to do a quick dive on this Spanish city that is pretty unlike many other cities in Spain or all of Europe, really. And I will pull up my question and answer and see what you all have asked. So question about what location would you pick for your next trip if there were no barriers? That is a really good question. I I think I would be interested in getting to either the extreme south or the north. And I'm blanking on some of the names here. If I were to scroll back really quickly to my map, which I can't right now. But I would be interested in moving to some of the other islands in Japan and just getting a sense of how culture is different in those places. I'm led to believe that things can be very different, especially once you get onto some of the other islands of Japan. And so I'd be interested in experiencing that. And another question, what part of Tokyo would you be most interested in spending more time in? I think that oh gosh, see, I'm not good at remembering the different names here, so I'm going to just scroll quickly back to the neighborhoods. Harajuku, sorry, that is, I think, the area where I have felt like spending more time. That's the area, that's the neighborhood of sort of arts and fashion and some more of that youth culture stuff. I think that's an area where I'd like to spend enough time to be able to pick up on sort of like, oh, there's an event happening tonight or tomorrow night, and I want to be able to actually make sure that I'm available to join in on it. Because I think sometimes when you just drop into a neighborhood, you need to hang out for a couple of days and sort of notice the flyers and that sort of thing. And so I think that's probably the place that next time I might go and spend a little bit more time if we're doing a longer trip in Tokyo. So that is what I had to offer for you about a trip to Japan. I just encourage you, don't be intimidated by it. If you do want to look for really cheap flights in and out, the things I would be aware of if you are like me in Minneapolis, there's at least one, and I think soon 2 nonstops a day from Minneapolis to Tokyo. If you happen to get a really cheap ticket on that flight, it's great. It's super nice to be able to fly nonstop, but often those tickets are really, really expensive. And so if that's just out of the realm of possibility right now, keep in mind that there's a lot more flights that go direct from Chicago to Tokyo. And sometimes when you go into a flight planning application, they don't want to route you from Minneapolis down to Chicago and then back to Asia. And so go on your Google Flights or your Kayak or whatever and just punch in O'Hare as your starting destination. And then if you book that ticket, you'll just have to figure out on your own how to get to Chicago, whether you want to drive or book a separate ticket or something like that. But often that can be a 50% or more savings by going that route as well. And you can do similar sort of games looking at flights out of Seattle in particular, because the Seattle to Tokyo route is really well served and it's a pretty quick flight. And so you can look at booking sort of 2 separate tickets, one from Minneapolis to Seattle, which is usually pretty affordable, and then a separate ticket from Seattle to Tokyo. So yeah, sort of, if you can get that nonstop, it's wonderful. But otherwise, just think about other options for getting there out of some airports that might have a little bit more traffic. So that's what I have to offer. Hope to see you next month. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanks for joining. Bye.